back in 2018 and before that, when someone, maybe you, went to the doctor, you had 100% confidence and faith that your doctor was going to give you the information you needed, was going to give you the correct advice. And I think in years since then, a lot of us have went, wait a minute, do doctors really know everything that we blindly believe that they know, or do they not? I've got an excellent guest who wrote a book all about this. And it kind of reminds me of my book, Lies My Doctor Told Me. Mine's more snarky, and his is much more ebullient and uplifting and positive. The author of Blind Spots, Dr. Marty Makary. Welcome, doctor.
Good to be with you, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm so happy that you were able to do this with me today. Give us all just a brief 30-second CV of you and who you are and why we should care what you think.
Well, thanks for having me, Ken. So I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins at the School of Medicine. I'm trained in surgery, gastrointestinal and surgical oncology. And I spend most of my time now doing public health researcher. I have a master's in public health and have always been focused on the big picture stuff in healthcare. So that's been the subject of a lot of our research. The big stuff in medicine that we're not talking about that we should be talking about. That's what we focus on.
I love that. I can remember the very first thing in medical school residency that made me go, wait, what? That can't be true. But, you know, as a medical student and a resident, you don't have time to doubt your professor and then go and look this up. My first question to you is, what is the first thing that you remember hearing in med school, residency, early practice that made you go, wait, what? That can't be right.
Well, gosh, we all have those moments. For me, it was when I learned that the age of puberty was going down by a week and a half each year for the last 30 plus years. And that now it was years earlier than it was just a century ago. And we would just dismiss it, right? Just brush it over. And I just wanted to say, stop, wait a minute. These are like major questions. Like it turns out, find out later in life that the pesticides we use and even microplastics have hormone-like binding properties, the food dyes that go in food. So I realized we have these giant blind spots of things we don't talk about, like our poison food supply and gut health and the microbiome. But that was one. There's I could probably, if we had more time, probably go through about 100 of these things because it just constantly, you're getting just, hit nonstop in med school with, remember like the first day of anatomy, you notice the lung is black in a cadaver, literally black. And in other cadavers, it's the normal flesh appearance. And they would say, oh, that's because city dwellers develop a black lung. But don't worry, it's not bad for you.
Right.
And it's just like, what? How did you dismiss that quickly, right?
That sounds like a big deal. Right. I remember my very first thing, I was an intern on my OBGYN rotation. And for a minute, I thought about OBGYN because I got to do all the surgery. And we would be on call for 24 hours. We deliver all of our vaginals and do the C-sections. And then the next morning, all the vaginal deliveries would go home. And my chief resident, who was a med-peds resident, so he's a very smart guy, he said, don't forget to write all of the exclusively breastfeeding mothers, write their infants a prescription for vitamin D drops. And I was like, why do they need vitamin D drops? He said, well, humans don't put vitamin D in their breast milk. And I was like, and I was post-call, remember, right, Marty? I was like, how are we not extinct if we don't put vitamin D? And sure enough, years later, I looked it up, and there was some excellent research done. Actually, one study in '81, but then the myth killer in I think 2003 or 4, that if a woman gets 6,400 IUs of vitamin D in her diet every day, she produces more than enough vitamin D for her infant to get plenty of vitamin D. But this chief resident, very intelligent guy, believed in his heart of hearts that Homo sapiens sapien did not produce vitamin D in the breast milk. And that was the very first one that I remember going, what the hell? How is that? That doesn't even make any sense. And I haven't slept in 36 hours. Right?
It's like the
So,
medicalization of ordinary life.
yeah. And then it's like, as I went through the remainder of my residency in my early career, I started to see more and more of these things. And invariably, from the time that the research was published, that was just virtually conclusive, 99% conclusive of one of these questions, it took 20 years before the average doctor in the average clinic knew it and was practicing it. And that's actually a large part of the reason I decided to start a YouTube channel. It's like, this is terrible. The average patient is going to have to wait 20 years between when this is pretty much known and to when it actually is being used by their doctor to impact and improve their life. And that's one of the reasons I finally listened to my wife Nisha and started a YouTube channel. I'm like, people, how many grandmothers and grandfathers are we going to lose? How many moms and dads will we lose unnecessarily waiting the evidently prerequisite 20 years for this new discovery to become mainstream practice? I know you're all over this. Why does it take 20 years, Marty?
Well, first of all, you're so right. There's so much medical dogma among experts. Drink 3 glasses of cow's milk a day. That's still a recommendation from the medical establishment. The food pyramid. We got peanut allergy prevention wrong, the overuse of antibiotics. So many different things have survived on medical dogma and still do to this day. When Bob Marley, the singer, came in his 30s with a discolored toe, he had melanoma and died from it. But his doctor said that he had just had a bruise because the dogma at the time was that Black people do not develop melanoma.
Right.
How can they develop melanoma? They have high pigmentation levels of melanoma.
Right.
So
Right.
The purpose of science is to challenge deeply held assumptions. And if you look at where we are in medicine today, sure, healthcare has done an amazing job with emergencies and very sophisticated operations. But when it comes to the health of the public, we have failed. American healthcare is a 50-year failure. All these chronic diseases are going up right in front of our eyes in our lifetime. Diseases that were rare just 2 generations ago, that still are rare in the Amish communities where they eat whole foods from good soil, and rare in other countries. And what's going on? We can't just keep medicating. We have this path that we're on is disastrous. It's expensive. It's making people sick. We've poisoned the food supply. So we need people to challenge deeply held assumptions, look in our blind spots, and ask, how do we get things wrong for so long? There's a psychology to cognitive dissonance that I go through in the book, but there is this sort of comfort with just holding on to what you believe first, not because it's more logical than new information, but because you heard it first. Yep. And people defend it, and you add in the pride of the medical establishment and the small group of leaders at the top who are making decisions and edicts based on their opinion.
And I call that arrogant ignorance.
Yeah.
And that's a deadly combination for people. And you brought up the Amish, and I think that's a gold mine, because part of the cost of doing any kind of control study is you got to have a control group. And so you make sure these people don't do this while these other people do this. We've got a built-in control group for so many medical interventions in the Amish community, because there are lots of things that mainstream medicine recommends that virtually no Amish do. They just don't do that. And so we've got a built-in control group there, but it seems like there's just a complete and utter lack of curiosity to say, hey, maybe we should study these guys. We might learn something because they're a control group. What do you think?
Look, we are right now witnessing the largest uncontrolled experiment in modern health history. And that is, we have introduced tons of chemicals, pesticides, microplastics, ultra-processed foods, seed oils into the modern diet, altering the microbiome. And no one talks about it. They're too busy demonizing saturated fat and trying to defend the old food pyramid. They just replaced it with the food compass. It's almost worse to some degree. It says that Lucky Charms is healthier than a steak. I mean,
right.
we've had very bad leaders in healthcare, and by and large, the rank and file doctors in American medicine are good people, but they've been the subject of this sort of bold groupthink from our leaders, a small group of people at the top. And we've done a terrible thing to doctors, in my opinion, Ken. I'm interested in your opinion here, but I think we've done a terrible thing to doctors. We told them, put your head down, focus on billing and coding, seeing patients in short visits. Here, memorize a bunch of medications in medical school, regurgitate it to us back on exams, go out there, go forth, and we're going to measure you by your throughput.
Yep.
And we haven't given doctors the time or resources to talk about the root causes of all these chronic diseases. Why is it a pediatrician would rarely see a case of type 2 diabetes in their entire career? And now 1 in 5 kids has diabetes or pre-diabetes.
Yeah, doctors are, and I think here's the problem. I think the average patient, and that's who this is all about in all four, that I think we should always keep that in mind. The average patient has no idea their doctor's daily ritual and their daily life. Doctors, I can remember when I used to be in full-time practice, I would spend hours every week. I was a coding expert, Dr. Makary. I knew every modifier. I knew every modifier to break out so that not only could I see somebody for their type 2 diabetes and bill a 99214, but I could also add a 25 modifier and then remove an actinic keratosis, 17,000, and get paid for both. Most doctors don't spend the time to basically circle jerk the CPT codes like that, and they have no idea. And so they wind up literally working like a dog. And if you did the math for the average pediatrician, especially family doctor, especially internal medicine doctor, if they don't have a procedure heavy practice like I did, when you do the math, they're making maybe $20 an hour. Maybe. It's terrible. Doctors have been effectively hijacked, just like pharmacists have. Pharmacists used to have time to have a conversation with a patient when they were picking up a prescription. They used to make the medicine. Doctors don't have time. If a patient that's why doctors get so pissed off. If you pull out like, hey, I've been doing some research and I printed out these studies, the average doctor is done with you at that moment because they know that they've got 4 more patients waiting, that they've overbooked because they have to do that in order to pay the bills and to have any hopes of maybe one day affording a BMW or going on that vacation, taking the family to Disney World. Doctors are not these super wealthy fat cats that a lot of people think they are. If they're in primary practice, they're just trying to make ends meet. Their income may be your income plus a zero, but their bills are also your bills plus a zero. Never forget that. But the patient doesn't know that. They think this guy went to medical school. This guy, he knows. If he tells me, especially older patients, if Nisha's mom, little Puerto Rican lady, lives in San Antonio, every time I go out there, I'm like, you should eat butter, not margarine. No. And of course I have to have a translator because she speaks no English, even to this. She's been here for 50 years. And she's like, no, my doctor. And she believes it, like pseudo-religious. Her doctor said, eat margarine. Her doctor said, eat whole grains. And her doctor said, do not eat saturated fat. Do not eat animal fat. She believes that in her heart of hearts. And even though I'm me, and also her grandson-in-law has no effect whatsoever. And I think that's the true danger is patients don't know what kind of a bind the average doctor's in.
The medical establishment put out the greatest piece of health misinformation in modern history, demonizing saturated fat, ignoring refined carbohydrates, ultra-processed foods, and added chemical ingredients in the food supply. And then they put doctors on a hamster wheel and told them, here's a hammer. You go play whack-a-mole with all these chronic diseases, and here's all your meds. And we watch Americans go down the path. Okay, now you're 30, now you're 40, now it's time for your statin. Now you add metformin. Now you add this drug, and before you know it, 66% of Americans are on prescription medications, and the average number is 4. Yep. What are we doing? Maybe we've done a terrible thing to doctors putting on the hamster wheel. Maybe we need to talk about school lunch programs instead of putting every kid on Ozempic. Maybe we need to teach cooking classes to people with diabetes instead of throwing insulin at people. And maybe
Yep.
we need to talk about the environmental exposures that cause cancer, not just the chemo to treat it. So the good news is a lot of doctors are getting off the hamster wheel. They're saying, I'm done. I'm not doing this. And they're addressing what's been in our blind spots. And that's what I've written about in the book.
Yeah, I love this book. I've listened to it twice. Blind Spots. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. Everybody who's in any way tangentially related to medicine or interested in the practice of medicine, you need to read Blind Spots. If you found Lies My Doctor Told Me a bit too snarky, then Blind Spots is absolutely the book for you. Now, you mentioned the saturated fat debacle. I mean, it's one of the greatest embarrassments, I think, in modern medicine. The research was done that definitively showed that cholesterol in your diet has no meaningful effect whatsoever. That was done in 1973. And they didn't publish it until 1989, cholesterol saturated fat. And it was not until 2015, until the American Medical Association, they didn't have a press release now, mind you, doctor. That's what they should have done. They should have said, hey, we need all the networks here because we've gotten this shit wrong for decades. We need to have all the major networks here. We've got a press release. We're going to make an announcement. The amount of cholesterol in your diet is irrelevant. It does not matter. Eat the shrimp. You can eat the shrimp. It's okay. The cholesterol will not hurt you at all. But they didn't do that. They just took that out of their guidelines. They used to say max 300 milligrams a day of cholesterol in the diets. They just stopped saying that. There was no press release. And so then you've got what I call the echo of the lie. They stopped it. The American Heart Association stopped telling the lie, but they didn't have a press release. So most doctors, unless they read the entire guidelines every 5 years when they come out, they didn't know that they had removed that from the guidelines, right? And so then one by one, doctors picked up on it. And then a few patients picked up on it. But even to this day, Dr. Makary, I bet we could go and survey 1,000 just primary care doctors out in a small community and say, should people limit the amount of cholesterol, dietary cholesterol in their diet? What percentage do you think would say, yeah, you should limit the cholesterol you eat?
80%, 90%.
This was known in 1973, but yet to this day, I would say 75, 80%. I totally agree with you. Of board certified doctors who have a license to practice medicine would counsel their patients, limit the amount of cholesterol you eat in their diet, even though the American Heart Association stopped saying that back in 2015. What do we do about this other than write books like Blind Spots?
You know, my dad's a doc, and I cannot convince him that dietary cholesterol and saturated fat are okay to eat because they've been pounding it into him for 60 years, his entire career. And this is not a small recommendation. This is the number one thing doctors told patients when they came in to see us for a primary care visit. We'd say, eat better and exercise. Eat better was defined as avoiding fat, switch to low-fat foods for 50, 60 years. A Harvard medical student last week ate 720 eggs in the course of a month.
My buddy, Nick Norwitz. Yeah.
Oh, you're friends with him? That's fun.
Yeah.
And his LDL went down. I mean, he's proving what has been known. And it's been known for a long time. I write about it in the book, but really it's a medical fact that dietary cholesterol is mostly esterified. It's bound to a bulky side chain. It's not absorbed. 99% of your body's cholesterol is made by your liver. And yet we still have people tiptoeing around eggs, which is a great source of protein, and avoiding this and that. You go to a cafe and low cholesterol. American Heart Association still has a low cholesterol cookbook on their website. So we need some humility. When we get something so tragically wrong and ignore the real root problem of our chronic disease epidemic right in front of our noses, you got to apologize. Look, my patients, if I make a mistake and I tell them right away, they can be very forgiving if you're honest and forthcoming. But you don't see that in the medical establishment. When they get things tragically wrong, they just kind of fade. Just fade out.
Back away. Yep.
We saw it during COVID.
Yep.
Saw with the peanut allergy abstinence recommendation they got wrong. just kind of fade out. Oh, we got this wrong. We were pounding moms to avoid peanut butter.
Let's talk about that. You've got a chapter about basically the American Academy of Pediatrics caused the epidemic of peanut allergies in the United States. Let's talk about that. And I've got some questions about that for you.
So peanut allergies before the year 2000 were rare and usually mild. But the epidemic was ignited in the year 2000 when the American Academy of Pediatrics put out a recommendation for all parents to make sure kids avoided peanut butter and peanut products altogether until they were 3 years old.
Official guideline.
That was a guideline. It started with, if the kid had any risk factors for an allergy, and that was so broadly defined, and it just got translated in the sort of echo chambers into giving pediatricians their marching orders to make sure parents avoided peanut butter until a kid turned 3. Well, guess what happened? Kids' immune systems became sensitized because they didn't have early exposure. Remember the old dirt theory, which we know in medicine as immune oral tolerance? They developed these allergies and profound allergies. And so we started seeing people come into the emergency room with severe anaphylaxis, or they'd have trouble breathing just being near a peanut, not even ingesting it. It was unbelievable. It was this epidemic, and it was surging because of this abstinence dogma. And what the pediatricians at the top of the American Academy of Pediatrics thought? We got anti-science moms who must be slipping peanut butter into their kids' diet early. We've got to double down on our abstinence recommendation. They never did the study.
And I want people to keep in mind, because you just said the thing, keep in mind, doctors, I say this all the time, but let me say it again. Doctors are just dudes and chicks, okay? They're just regular people. They look for shortcuts just like you do. And so when they get a new guideline like this from the AAP, that there may have been some nuance to the guideline, like if the kid's high risk, blah, 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 but doctors are just dudes and chicks. What they took away from that is, okay, just tell moms, I'll just put that in my handout. Don't give your kids peanuts till they're 3. Boom, done. Now I don't have to think about that. I don't have to spend 10 minutes explaining this to each and every new mom. It's in my handout. I just say it, no peanuts till 3. Boom. Easy to remember, right? Easy to remember. I got it in my handout. Now every mom gets told that. Now you said the thing, Dr. Makary. I'm sure that the American Academy of Pediatrics would never issue such a blanket guideline unless there was significant research to back up such a recommendation. Tell everybody the reams of research. It's going to take Dr. Makary a while to rattle all this research off. So sit down, get a drink, and here we go.
There was no clinical trial. They just made it up. They made it up. The UK made it up 2 years prior, kind of misconstruing a really poorly done study. So they made it up. And then we thought, well, they made it, they are doing this, so maybe we should do it. And it kind of, if you know nothing about immunology and you just want to make something up, yeah, you could say, how do parents avoid peanut allergies? Yeah, just make sure their kids are not exposed to any peanut butter in the first 3 years of life. Well, they got it perfectly backwards. They did tremendous damage. We still have the worst peanut allergy epidemic in the world. Here in the United States, it's a unique problem. You barely see it in the Amish communities where they didn't do this. A couple pediatricians thought, this is crazy. Peanut butter abstinence in the first 3 years of life? No, you're going to create allergies. And so they didn't listen to it. And guess what? I interviewed one of those guys for the book, and none of his kids ever developed a peanut allergy. Schools had to ban peanuts, and then it made the problem worse. It compounded, and there are no peanut allergies to this day in most of Africa and Europe and other parts of the world. This is a manufactured, man-made epidemic that's real. Peanut allergies are real, but this was created by medical dogma. They finally did the proper study. Came out a little over about 9 years ago, the New England Journal of Medicine. Simple study. They published it, and oops, we got it wrong. You didn't see a big correction or a public apology. Just
no press release, no press conference.
no press conference.
Hmm.
The National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, called NIAID, they just played along. Eventually, they funded that study that got done, but for 15 years, parents were given the wrong advice, creating this terrible problem in society today.
And let's not beat around the bush here. I'm a little more abrasive. Dr. Makary is much more polished than me. Children died because of this recommendation. Okay, children were crippled because of this recommendation, not only physically, but I also, if a kid had an allergic reaction to peanuts, that mom is now going to be hyper vigilant for the rest of that child's life. That child is basically going to live in a bubble and be afraid of everything for the rest of their life. Permanent long-term damage was done by this recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Let's be very clear about that. And I think you'd agree with that. You probably wouldn't say it the way I said it, but this is that's inarguable. They caused that harm with this recommendation.
Well, look, Ken, you call balls and strikes, and that's what I like about you. And you're right. That's exactly what, and it's still happening. Kids are still dying, and living with a peanut allergy is miserable. I mean,
Yeah.
I met a kid who's a teenager who's never been to a restaurant in her life, right? Because it's too risky. The allergy is too severe, and they're going through these painful treatments. But the peanut allergy epidemic is really a story about the medical establishment's hubris. If you look at the same American Academy of Pediatrics, now they do some good work.
Yep.
But they are today pushing for 6-year-olds to go on Ozempic. Okay.
Absolutely.
So we need to recognize, when it's from the experts, from the medical establishment, we still need science before we convert people over.
Yeah. Answer me this, doctor. You study this stuff for a living. There's got to be a committee at the American Academy of Pediatrics and all these other places where stupid recommendations come out. All 9 members of the committee said, yeah, let's just make that an official recommendation. Not one person spoke up. You may not know the backroom dealings, but I'm just saying, as a kind of a global, let's talk about this. And then at the AAP, their annual meeting, there were no kind of preeminent pediatricians that said, you know, I've got an undergraduate degree in immunology, and that doesn't make a damn bit of sense. What the hell are you talking about? Why are we making this recommendation? Weren't there prominent pediatricians at Johns Hopkins and other large universities who said, you know, I looked for the research that backs up this recommendation. I couldn't find any. Do you think those conversations just don't happen? Or do they happen and those doctors are just told to shut up? How does this become an official recommendation with zero meaningful research? How does that happen?
I think they're just sidelined, the dissenting opinions, because it's easier to just surround yourself with people who agree with you. And you see this in business, you see it in politics, you see it. But in science, we're supposed to have an open discourse. We're supposed to challenge deeply held assumptions. But there's a lot of pride in the medical leadership. There's a guy at Johns Hopkins who's a peanut allergy expert, and he was around during that whole time. I've seen his name on documents. I tried to interview him for the book, but he didn't get back to me. I did find a bunch of the people who made this bad recommendation, because in the book, I like to tell the backstory, because I don't want to just tell people, this is the textbook of health. Here's all the things you should do. I want them to hear the backstory. And that way, by the way, it's a better story. You remember it more, and you can see kind of the culture of medicine. So in researching the peanut allergy recommendation, a couple of those people who made the recommendation told me, well, first of all, 1 or 2 of them just said, we feel terrible. We got it so wrong. We should never have done this. But a bunch of folks were kind of like, you know what? We did our best. And the public was asking us for some recommendation, since we're the experts, and we felt like we needed to tell them something to do. And I said, no, you don't. No, you don't. If you don't know, the right answer in medicine is we don't know. And you saw that absent during COVID. I mean, I didn't write about COVID in the book. It's too tribal and people are sick of it. But you see this, issue of humility.
And I'll tell you, doctor, I get asked all the time by members of our private community, what about this booster? What do you think about this COVID topic, that COVID topic? And my standard answer right now, and it may change, it will change in the future, but my standard answer right now is, look, there's so much emotion around COVID, both pro and con. The water is so muddy that I truly don't think any doctor can give you a definitive answer as to, should I do this? Should I avoid this? Is this better? Is that better? I'm like, dude, I'm honestly telling you, I have no idea. And I think any honest doctor is going to say, I don't know. Ask me in 10 years, because right now, literally, there's so much muck flying. I don't think anybody knows the truth. What do you think about that?
Well, look, I think you're touching on a very important topic. That honesty you're describing has been missing. And that's why trust in doctors and hospitals, in a new study that just came out in JAMA Network, plunged from 71% to 40%, a 31-point drop in trust in our sacred profession. And I think that's because of this hubris that you've seen. We need to say, I don't know when that's the right answer. And I wish all of these zealots who are pushing, the fifth COVID booster shot in a young, healthy 12-year-old girl who's already had COVID, I wish they would take 5% of their enthusiasm and absolutism and talk about our poison food supply and the school lunch programs and the ultra-processed foods, and finally address the root cause of so many of our chronic diseases.
I take it that you know who John Yudkin is. I think you talked about him in the book. And so the research we were talking about earlier about saturated fat and cholesterol in the diet, there was actually a doctor on the other side of that. And he said, I don't think it's the cholesterol and fat in the diet. I think it's the sugar in the diet and the simple carbohydrates. I really think that's what's pushing the heart disease epidemic that we're seeing. When Eisenhower had his first heart attack, that's kind of when America woke up and went, oh, crap, the president had a heart attack. We need to figure out what's causing this. And so politicians became very interested. And what was decided on, based on flawed research, once again, and then promulgated as this is the party line. Saturated fat in the diet leads to heart disease, the end. Obviously, that was wrong. But I get into a fight on Twitter at least once a day with a doctor, board certified doctor at good university, who says, dude, you are hurting people by telling them that eating eggs and bacon for breakfast is good for them, but to avoid Fruit Loops or Lucky Charms, because the Tough School of Nutrition, their food compass says that Lucky Charms and Fruit Loops are much better quality foods than bacon and eggs. How do you live with yourself, Dr. Berry? So again, I love you. It's cognitive dissonance, but Dr. Makary, this is a big damn deal. More people in the United States are metabolically ill than are metabolically well. Way more. It's not 50-50. The majority, 88% of U.S. adults have at least one marker of metabolic syndrome. How do we start to move the needle other than just having Twitter fights and making YouTube videos and writing books like Blind Spots? How do we get the press conference with all the major networks and say, hey, we got a bunch of shit wrong in medicine. We need to set the record straight. And we don't want you and your mom and your grandfather to have to wait 20 years to benefit from this correction. How do we make that happen faster?
Well, it's frustrating, but I'm an optimist, and I think good things are happening. Ken, look at your own platform, for example. It used to be that doctors would just need to get in line, and the small group of medical priests would say, all right, we're going to control. It's almost like mind control. We're going to control what everybody says and believes because we control the New England Journal and the medical journals. We control the academic elites. We're going to get the Surgeon General to issue this fake food pyramid. And we've got access to all the corporate media. And they could just say whatever they want. It would go unchallenged until now. A bunch of us are saying, hey, we're scientists with credentials and chops as good as any. And we're going to show you methodologically how you're wrong. and now we're going directly to the public. The story of the demonization of fat and John Yudkin is an amazing story. Every American needs to know about it. You've been talking about it. I summarized it in one of the chapters in the book. So this is, I think, good stuff is happening right now, because if we can educate the public directly, as we have started to now with added sugar, guess what? The food companies will respond to market demand, not because they're good people, but because there's consumer sales there and there's profit there. So now some food companies are advertising no added sugar on their product. We can move markets by educating the public, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've got to start talking about the other aspects of health and gut health, and how we remove toxins from our food supply.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the actors that's actually causing harm, just like the American Academy of Pediatrics, is the American Diabetes Association. They take millions of dollars each and every year from big food manufacturers. They will include their products in their recipes on their website. Yeah, I called out the ADA for 2 years on Twitter. Dr. Bob Gethay used to be their chief medical spokesman. I tried to get him on my YouTube channel to talk to him. Nothing but silence. It got so bad that a group of doctors and I actually formed the American Diabetes Society. And we're working on getting that funded now so that we can start actually teaching type 2 diabetics, hey, 95% of the time you can reverse this completely and not have to take any medicine at all. To teach type 1 diabetics, hey, if you'll just eat this way, you can use 80% less insulin, have a normal A1C, and not have to have your leg chopped off or be on dialysis by the time you're 35 or 40. Is it going to take parallel institutions like that? Or do you think that's part of the solution as well, is to just stop trying to get the AHA and the ADA to have a press conference and basically own up to their mistakes? Do we just need to start creating parallel organizations that actually give people good information? Is that part of the solution?
I think it's all of the above, but I think we need moms, parents, doctors, health professionals, nurses, everyone to say, we cannot keep going down this path of making our country sick and medicating them. It's unethical. Why have autoimmune diseases skyrocketed? Now it affects 1 in 5 women. What's going on there? Why has autism gone up 14% every year for the last 23 consecutive years? Are we just going to just put them all on meds? I mean, what are we doing?
And then when we look at that control group you spoke of earlier, the Amish, we don't see that in the Amish children.
Yeah. You don't need a 10-year randomized controlled trial to understand some basic principles of common sense. If certain things make people sick and places that don't use those things are not as sick, then maybe we shouldn't just freely use them without asking any safety questions. Take tartrazine, for example. You mentioned Lucky Charms.
Yep.
So tartrazine is a coal tar byproduct. It's a chemical. And this chemical was found to look bright yellow. They started adding it to fabric, and then the fabric would look yellow. And then somebody thought, hey, we can put this in children's cereal and make the colors brighter. And, it's a chemical and it's not really been thoroughly studied, but what the heck? We have this standard in the United States with the FDA where you can basically do what you want, innocent until proven guilty. Studies get done and they show an association with anxiety, depression, tumors, even genetic changes, whole host of problems. And it goes by the cutesy name yellow number 5. And when you get sick and you need a medication, let's say you get asthma, well, the medicine itself has yellow number 5 in it. It's like, do you need a 10-year double-blinded study to basically have the common sense to know these are dangerous chemicals that do not appear in nature, and we should not be eating them with the mass proportions that we are?
Yeah, I totally agree. You brought up asthma. And that makes me think of your chapter on antibiotics. Asthma has always been around, but when we look back at the historical records of medicine, there was never the prevalence of childhood asthma like there is today. And in your chapter in the book, you go into why you think how medicine's actually causing this. And I think it's probably multifactorial, and I think you probably agree with that too. But I think a large part of this is giving children antibiotics for every runny nose, for every earache, for every sore throat, for every cough. Antibiotic. I think looking at the research, the average kid by the time they're 10, they've taken 20 rounds of antibiotics, and if their mom was vigilant and made sure they finished the round, right? How do these early antibiotics early in a child's life, which let me just say 85 to 90% of the time are doing the child absolutely no good whatsoever. 85% of childhood upper respiratory, everything, earache, sore throats, coughs, snotty nose, it's 85 to 90% of the time it's a virus. The antibiotic does not help at all. So what happens when you start throwing antibiotics at every kid with a runny nose?
Well, first of all, antibiotics, as you and I have both seen, can save lives, but
Sure.
the vast majority are unnecessary. And what they're doing is carpet bombing the microbiome, the lining of the gastrointestinal tract of millions of different bacteria that normally live in a balance. And that balance is important because those bacteria are involved in digestion and train the immune system. They produce serotonin that's involved in mood and mental health. They produce Ozempic, actually. They produce GLP-1 in low levels. They deconjugate estrogen. So this microbiome is a central organ system that is so important for gut health and overall health because it interfaces, every cell in the body is connected. And so we have ignored gut health. It's been in the blind spots of modern medicine. Well, new research is showing us just how damaging unnecessary antibiotics can be to a child. Those antibiotics are changing that balance. You have overgrowth of some types of bacteria after they carpet bomb some of the bacteria in the microbiome. And so at the Mayo Clinic, they did an amazing study looking at 14,000 kids, comparing kids who took antibiotics in the first couple of years of life compared to kids who didn't. The kids who took antibiotics in the first couple of years of life had a 20% higher rate of obesity. Why is that? Well, ask farmers. They've been noticing that for decades. When you give antibiotics to animals, it makes them fatter.
Sure.
And a 90% higher rate of asthma and a 32% higher rate of attention deficit disorder. Remember that gut-brain connection. And higher rates of learning disabilities. All these things are on the rise. Celiac was nearly 300% higher. And the more courses of antibiotics a child took, the greater the risk of each of those chronic diseases. So it tells us that the microbiome is this central organ that we've been ignoring. And that's just one insult to the microbiome. There's a whole bunch of other things, from unnecessary C-sections to the ultra-processed foods. If pesticides are going down your system, guess what? They're killing some bacteria, seed oils. So people need to know the basic principles of gut health in order to avoid this kind of chronic condition, sort of purgatory that we're in. And these poor kids, they come in with chronic abdominal pain, and we don't know what to do. Doctors are just, we're discombobulated. We threw it throws a wrench into the engine of modern medicine because we don't teach this stuff. There's very little education in med school. And when there is, it's mostly misinformation from the old food pyramid.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, this is another thing. So remember how earlier we were talking about doctors and what a time crunch they're under and what a bind they're under. Now, imagine a young mom brings her child to the doctor with a runny nose, had a runny nose for 3 days. The doctor's running late. The mom's pissed off. The kid's sick. She didn't sleep last night. She wants something done, right? The doctor's well aware that mom is not in a good mood and wants something done. The doctor can't do anything about it 85 to 90% of the time. Literally nothing can the doctor do to make this child well. This has to run its course. Now, the doctor has a choice. I can either spend 10 minutes explaining to this mom who's not slept that these antibiotics will not help your baby at all. Your baby's going to be fine. This is a viral infection. It's going to be better in a few days. Just go home. Or this doctor can write a prescription for amoxicillin and say, now this is 3 times a day for 10 days and you can't stop it. You got to give all 10 days of it. There you go. The doctor most of the time knows it's not going to help the kid at all. But rather than have that 30-minute conversation or fight with this mom, that's what the average doctor does. So I always, anytime this subject comes up, I tell everybody watching, preface your office visit. When you walk into the doctor with any kind of upper respiratory anything, tell the doctor, look, if this is viral, I don't want an antibiotic. I'm not here for a prescription. If there's something that can be done, I want you to do it. But if this is viral and there's nothing to be done, tell me that, and I'll be happy with that. If you give that doctor the liberty to go, oh, okay, so you're not here for a Z-Pack. You're not here for augmentin. You actually just want me to be a doctor and tell you what I think needs to happen. You could cut down the risk of giving your child inappropriate antibiotics that could literally change their entire life, not in a good way, in a bad way, with the asthma, the chronic allergic rhinitis, the ADHD, all the other things Dr. Makary said. Tell your doctor right up front, if the antibiotic won't help this, I don't want it. Do you have any other advice, doctor, for patients? How can they talk to their family doctor and say, hey, if antibiotics won't help my kid, don't give them to me?
Yeah, look, we have to address this consumerist culture of shaking down your doctor for antibiotics. Don't demand antibiotics from your doctor unless it's critically needed and the doctor believes that it could be important for the kid. Now, antibiotics can be important for a bacterial ear infection. Maybe early antibiotics can prevent hearing loss, but most antibiotics are unnecessary. We see it all the time. Heck, in the military, they give you a penicillin shot before basic training routinely. Everybody.
Yes.
What are we doing? And we're creating superbugs and resistance. So when I learned about this research, even for adults, that nurses in one study who took antibiotics were more likely to have colon polyps. And there's this suggestion that that may be one of the precancerous aspects of colon cancer. I don't take antibiotics unless it's really critical.
Same for me. I haven't taken antibiotics in 25 years. My son, who's about to be 5, has never taken antibiotics. My daughter, who's 2.5, has never taken antibiotics. My other kids, I can't say that because I was ignorant back then. I didn't know better. Some of my kids, my older kids, had antibiotics every 2 weeks. And so as you learn better, you do better. At least that's what we hope. But this antibiotic thing, I think, is a huge, huge thing. Not even bringing up antibiotic resistance and its increasing prevalence, but just the damage to the immune system that's done when you muck up a young child's gut microbiome. But then that brings us to the flip side of that coin, Dr. Makary. People know something ain't right. They know there's something's not making sense here. And then you have influencers start talking about the microbiome, right? And then they start selling formulations and supplements, AKA snake oil. It's like, oh, this will fix your microbiome. And I've read enough of the research on the microbiome to know that currently medicine, the medical institution doesn't know shit about shit, just to be blunt. We know the microbiome's important, right? It's super important. But when it comes to, hey, we're going to do the following things with this probiotic or prebiotic to tweak your microbiome one way or the other, is there any research that gives us any hope that they know a damn thing about how you can improve somebody's microbiome currently?
Well, most of these probiotics just go right through your system, and it is the Wild West. Most of these probiotics are unstudied. We don't know which ones help or hurt. Every now and then when somebody's desperate, I'll say, feel free to try them, but
Yep.
don't sign up for a lifelong subscription, because they've tried so many of these different antibiotics, and a few of them, sort of in non-commercial forms, have been shown to maybe help restore that normal microbiome, but so can yogurt or fermented drinks or other things that are not these expensive sort of marketing ploys. So research is developing, and we'll learn more, but avoid the unnecessary antibiotics. Sort of my principles for gut health: avoid unnecessary antibiotics, cook with healthy oils, avocado oil, extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, not the seed oils. Eat whole foods, avoid the ultra processed foods with chemicals and food dyes and other chemical additives that are engineered to be addictive. Introduce a little early peanut butter and milk and eggs as soon as a kid can take some food in infancy. You want to avoid unnecessary C-sections. And when a woman needs a C-section, which sometimes they do to save a life, then some hospitals are now using a protocol to swab the vaginal fluid on the baby's skin, because the birth canal is where the baby's microbiome is seated.
Yep.
Avoid pesticides, eat organic foods when you're eating the surface of a fruit or vegetable, and filter your water to try to get rid of some of these toxins and microplastics. So those are some basic principles for gut health. But the C-section one is a much larger topic, and I have a whole section on childbirth in the book.
I'll tell you a story. When I was a third-year resident in family medicine, I was at a hospital, and after a C-section, the nurse took the baby over to the warmer, doing all the stuff, taking it immediately away from the mother, right? And so I walked over. I was the baby doctor, so I walked over there to help the nurse. Obviously, she didn't need my help at all, because she'd done that 1,000 times, right? But I noticed that she still had her glove on, where she was assisting in the section, and she rubbed it on the baby's nose and mouth. And I was like, what is that? And she looked at me kind of nervously. She's like, oh, I was just stimulating you just to make sure, he's stimulated. And I thought, again, I was like, what? Something ain't right. So I started watching that nurse, and she did that after every C-section. And I finally figured out what she was doing, and we had a conversation, and she was scared to death initially. And then I was like, no, I think what you're doing is brilliant. Why? And so she would literally touch the mom's perineum on a C-section baby. And then she would go over, and while she was resuscitating the baby, for people who don't know, when a baby's born, usually they come out facing backwards, and they do what's called the perineal kiss, where their nose and mouth go literally over mom's perineum. She was replicating the perineal kiss, and she was doing it ninja style, Dr. Makary. She didn't ask permission. She just knew that baby needed to be exposed to the bacteria from mom's birth canal. And she had taken that on herself to do. Now, I don't condone that, but at the same time, how brilliant is that? That bacteria that she exposed those kids to, she potentially saved them from a life of allergic rhinitis or asthma or any other things, unless when they got to their pediatrician, they got 10 rounds of antibiotics, right?
Amazing, because at Mount Sinai Medical Center and some others now, they're doing formal clinical trials with vaginal fluid swabbing of the baby on their skin. And, just to give you a sense as to how different the microbiome is when you don't pass through the birth canal, they've done studies, and the diversity is different of the microbiome. Yep. When a baby is born by C-section, remember, the gut is sterile in utero. And so the millions of different bacteria that line the inside of the GI tract, the microbiome, is seeded from the birth canal. But when you're born by C-section, a sterile baby is extracted from a sterile operative theater. And what may seed that baby's gut are the bacteria that normally live in the hospital. And that's a very different type of microbiome. And so there's studies now have actually found higher rates of asthma in kids born by C-section. This has been known for a while. Higher rates of inflammatory bowel disease. Well, when you have a different microbiome, you may have more pro-inflammatory bacterial overgrowth. And a study just came out in one of the JAMA journals. This is one of our top journals, finding the increase in colon cancer that we're seeing in people under age 50 was associated with having been born by C-section. And so many of the changes in the body are related to inflammation. When we talk about health in 100 years, we're going to be talking about how's your inflammation? Is it low? Or we're going to have better measures of it. And guess what drives a lot of the inflammation? It's the microbiome. Guess what a lot of these seed oils like vegetable oil do, which these are not healthy. They're healthy sounding, but they're denatured and changed with a chemical solvent. The seed oils are pro-inflammatory agents. They increase inflammation. And so all of these things drive inflammation. Well, inflammation is behind not just chronic diseases, but cancer. And all of these things have been going up in the modern era. In the last 50 years, the era of antibiotics, C-sections, ultra-processed foods, not to say there's not important indications for antibiotics and C-sections, but
True.
What are we doing to the microbiome? We have a blind spot we have not been talking about that we need to talk about.
Yep, I totally agree. What are your thoughts about butter, beef tallow, and lard? Are you a fan, or are they too high in saturated fat and cholesterol?
Nope, I'm a fan.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, Doc, as we wrap this up, I would love to, I want you study, you look at all this stuff constantly. You think about this. I know you do. You think, you're in the shower every morning thinking, I wonder if that's been clinically proven or if that's bullshit. I know you do. You said the next 100 years. Let's talk about the next 10 or 20 years. What are we doing right now in mainstream medicine? Now, this is just a prediction on Dr. Makary's part. He's not making any recommendations. We've taken off our doctor hats. We're just two guys talking and predicting the future. 20 years from now, what are we going to look back at modern medical practice and go, that was dumb as hell? Why did we do that? Give me the first ones that come to your mind.
Well, I think people are not going to tolerate food dyes just to make their food pretty and appeal to children. I think we're going to reevaluate these billion-dollar drugs we're advertising nonstop on television commercials and actually address the root cause, which is food can reduce the risk and alleviate many of these conditions. I think we're going to recognize the benefits of hormone replacement therapy for perimenopausal women, something that has been unfairly characterized as a breast cancer causing agent when the data never supported that, something I go to in depth in the book. We're not going to be putting fluoride in drinking water because if fluoride is killing the bacteria in the mouth, it's bactericidal and so-called reducing cavities in some of these studies. Well, what's it doing to the microbiome bacteria? Yep. It's probably carpet bombing some of those too. And so how about avoiding Coca-Cola, and other sugary drinks and juices instead of putting fluoride in the drinking water? I think we're going to question some of these transgender recommendations that we're putting out there with such absolutism when no study has ever found that transgender surgery reduces suicide risk. So I think we're going to look back and question some of the stuff that's put out there with such absolutism right now. And I think we're going to hopefully start teaching about health in medical schools and not just medications and operations, because we can't just keep playing whack-a-mole. And the doctors are smart. They're realizing, hey, they've been played. This is a broken system, and they want to get off the hamster wheel.
Yeah, and I certainly hope that enough doctors can get off the hamster wheel, but many of them are so bound up in medical school debt that they can't. And then also many doctors have such a poor population of patients who are so financially poor. There's no way they can pay for concierge medicine. So hopefully we can come up with some other way to fund healthcare, because there are a lot of people that cannot afford to pay cash to go see a doctor who's actually thinking outside the box. Dr. Makary, thank you so much for doing this. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'd love to have you back for round 2 in the near future if you're game. Tell people where they can find you and what you're up to in the near future.
Well, thanks, Ken. Good to be with you. Always good to see your work out there. I'm on social media, and the book Blind Spots is available basically wherever books are sold. It sold out everywhere in America on opening day 2 weeks ago, but I'm told that Amazon and all the other booksellers are now restocked. So hopefully people can hear about all this work that we're doing at our Johns Hopkins research team.
And there is an audible version if you have ADHD like me because of vaccines and too many antibiotics when I was a kid. Thank you very much, Dr. Makary. I'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, Ken.
All right. Bye-bye.